Imagine you've built the perfect agent for your blog writing team. Now, your social media team wants to use it, but they need different prompts, different models, and different tools. But modifying your underlying code for each use case is not only time-consuming, but also prone to errors. This creates two distinct problems. Developers get stuck in constant code changing cycles that slow down iteration, while business teams can't experiment without engineering support. That's where LangGraph Assistants come in. Today, I'll show you how they help you solve both problems by separating your agent's architecture from its configuration. With LangGraph Assistants, you can reuse the same agent architecture across completely different use cases. Developers can A/B test different configurations without deploying separate code bases, while business teams can adapt existing agents for new scenarios instantly. You can customize different prompts, models, tools, and more without ever having to touch your underlying code. This means that developers can experiment with new models or prompt strategies in minutes instead of hours. And business teams can fine-tune agent behavior through Studio's intuitive visual interface. When you're ready, you can deploy these variations within minutes on LangGraph platform. Developers can push configuration changes straight to production without code deployments. And business teams can go from an idea to a live assistant in just minutes. And for developers who want full programmatic control, you can automate assistant lifecycles, deploy configurations across environments, manage hundreds of assistants at scale, and integrate assistant management directly into your existing CI/CD pipelines and infrastructure. Let me show you this concept visually, because understanding this foundation will unlock everything we're about to build today. To simplify things, you can think of your graph as your agent's architecture, like this React style agent we have here. The graph defines the flow. Your agent receives a question, thinks about it, can use the tools as many times as it needs, and then responds. This reasoning pattern stays the same regardless of the specific job your agent is doing. But here's the key insight. While your graph structure stays the same, the detail should be flexible. That's where configuration comes in. Configuration is how we can specify these customizable details in our graph. For example, for this React style agent, we've set different prompts, we can set different models to use, and we can set different tools our model has access to. Additionally, you can define any configuration fields you want. This allows you to have the same graph with completely different capabilities based on its runtime configuration. An assistant is what you get when you combine your graph with a specific configuration. It's a saved name version, like Social Media Assistant v1, that you can deploy and reuse. Each assistant represents a specialized version of your graph. So for the Social Media Assistant, you can see we have a prompt that's specified for social media content generation. We've selected a model that's appropriate for this task. And additionally, we gave it access to some tools to help it accomplish this. This is now saved and versioned, and we can use it anywhere in our applications. Here's an analogy to tie this all together. So you can think of your graph as a specific car model. So let's say the coupe you see on your screen here. When you go to purchase that specific car, they're going to give you some options. You can think of those as configurable fields or your configuration. They'll ask you for what trim level you'd like, the different color options, the different engines, and maybe even a manual or automatic transmission. You can think of configuration as the options that the manufacturer wanted to provide the end customer. An assistant is now the specific car that you would actually buy, or the specific configuration of the car that you want to buy. So for this, we chose a blue car with the sport trim, a V6 engine, and a manual transmission. It's the same underlying vehicle with completely different driving experience based on how you've configured it. Let's now jump right into our project, and we'll see how configuration can speed up our development. So jumping into this project, you can see right off the bat, we're importing some tools from a tools file we've created. We're importing the Create React agent pre-built, and then we're loading in our chat model using a utility we created just to simplify loading in chat models. Next, we're going to go ahead and make our graph using the pre-built, but first we need to initialize a few variables. Let's first initialize our LLM using that load chat model function we imported. We'll start by hard coding in OpenAI's GPT-4o1 Mini. From there, we're going to import a few of our tools, including the basic research tool and get today's date. We'll also initialize our prompt on how we want to create our social media content. Great. The next step is to use the Create React Agent pre-built, specify our model, tools, and prompt. And that's it. We just need to return our graph variable from this function, and we'll be able to compile and build this in LangGraph Studio. So let's go ahead and give that a shot and jump into Studio. Now in LangGraph Studio, our visual agent IDE, we're able to visualize exactly how this agent works. For more information about LangGraph Studio, I'll be sure to link to more documentation and resources below. The first thing that we can do in Studio is go ahead and test our agent and see how it works. Great, so you see our agent worked as intended. It was able to go off and use some tools and come back to us with a social media post on today's sports news. If we wanted to reuse this architecture for a different use case or a different purpose, maybe for generating long-form content, maybe our finance team wants to use it and has access to different tools, we would then have to go into our underlying code, make the modifications for each use case, and deploy separate agents for each of these teams. That's where the concept of assistants and configuration come into play. With LangGraph, we can specify configurable fields within our application, which enables us to programmatically create different configurations of our agents called assistants. Let's go back into our code, and I'll show you just how we can modify our current graph to utilize configuration. Let's go ahead and set some configurable fields in our project, and I'll show you how we can bring that into our existing graph. So you can see in this configuration file, we're going to be defining a class called configuration, and we'll be using the Pydantic base model to get started. The first configurable field we'll define is our system prompt. We'll provide a default system prompt and a quick description. Next, we can define our model as a configurable field with a list of options. The last configurable field we'll define is our selected tools. We'll provide a list of different options that our users can choose from. Next, we can transition into our graph, and we can show how we can bring in these configurable fields at runtime. You can see we've added a few things. The first being the getTools function, which will convert a list of tool names into actual tool functions for us to use within our graph. Next, we're importing our configuration class and runnable config from LangChain core. You can see our makeGraph function. We're now defining a new parameter called config. We can then initialize a variable called configurable with our configuration. Now, instead of hard coding these values, we can actually get them from our configuration. So we can specify our LLM based on what's in our configuration, the selected tools our model has access to, and the prompt itself. I can also specify the name from our configuration so that we can keep track of which graphs we're building. Lastly, we'll be using the create React agent prebuilt again. You can see we've added a new parameter called config schema, and we're just passing our configuration class in there so that LangGraph and LangGraph Studio will know what's in our configuration. The next step is to run LangGraph dev again, and we can jump right back into Studio. What makes this approach so powerful is that you can now experiment instantly with different configurations of your agent right in Studio, whether we're locally debugging or pulling a LangGraph platform production deployment right into Studio. You can save and version each of these configurations for reusability and robust version control. We can deploy new configurations instantly without any code changes. We can create, manage, and utilize our assistants programmatically via the SDK or API in production. From one architecture, we now have unlimited specializations. Let's see this in action visually within LangGraph Studio one more time. We're now back in LangGraph Studio, and we now have a Manage Assistants button on the bottom left. This opens up our configuration playground where we can create specialized versions of our agent. As you can see, the first thing that we have access to is our default configuration we defined in our code. What's more exciting though is I can click into this sports writer example that I've already created and activate it. From here, you can see that I have a sports writer system prompt already created for hardcore sports news. Additionally, I've defined a larger model and selected a few relevant tools to get started. So let's go ahead and give this a try. I can click our messages tab here, and I can ask it to tell me about potential Kevin Durant trades. You can see it's going to go off and get today's date first, and then recursively call our advanced research tool until it's gathered enough information about Kevin Durant trade rumors to respond back to me. As you can see, this is a great response and exactly how I want my sports news written for me. Next, if I click back into our Manage Assistants tab, we can view another assistant I have created for social media writing. Let's go ahead and activate our social media writer. And you can see we have an advanced system prompt just for social media writing. We're using a smaller but less expensive model, and we're using more basic research tools. Let's open up a new thread, and I can go ahead and give this a shot. So again, we're going to ask it about today's sports news. And you can see it's going to use the Get Today's Date tool, do some basic research, and then respond back to me. Awesome. So you can see our social media team wants content for all the different platforms we might be posting to, and we have that all created in one invocation. Now let's open up our Manage Assistants tab, and let's go ahead and make a new assistant. So you'll see up here on the top left, we have this new button. We can specify a new assistant. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is a finance writer assistant. I have a specific system prompt on how I want it to do financial research and analysis. So I'll paste that in. I can specify our model here. So I'm going to go ahead and use 4.1, select our finance research tool, our advanced research tool, and Get Today's Date tool. And that should be good. So I can click save, and you'll see we have a finance writer assistant created. Additionally, an assistant ID is populated since this is an already deployed graph, but more on that a little bit later. I can again go ahead and invoke this assistant. So I'll ask it to get me today's latest tech finance news. And go ahead and see how this performs in real time. Awesome. We can see now that it responded back to us with the latest financial tech news, just how we wanted it to. We've now seen how we can take the same graph architecture and create completely different personalities and capabilities of our agents, called assistants. I can switch between them instantly and test immediately. Let's now transition to a quick little sidebar on how we can improve our configuration to make visualizing multi-agent or complex architectures a little bit easier in Studio. For complex multi-agent systems, we can configure individual nodes separately. So let's jump into this configuration file that's for a supervisor-style architecture. You can see not much has changed here in comparison to our other graphs, other than a few additional fields. So you'll see we're specifying a certain prompt and model just for our supervisor, but additionally we're specifying this JSON schema extra field. This allows us to define which node these different configuration fields belong to. So you can see we have the same for our finance subagents configuration, our research subagents configuration, and for our writer subagents configuration. The magic is in this JSON schema extra parameter, where we define the subagent or agent that these configurable fields belong to. Let's now run LangGraph Dev so we can see the supervisor architecture within LangGraph Studio. Back in LangGraph Studio, you can see our supervisor agent has access to those 3 subagents. But we can see additionally now is we have these little cogs on each of our agent. If I click it, we'll open up our node configuration. You can see now we have configuration that's specific to just our supervisor. This allows us to modify just our supervisor's configurable fields in order to optimize a specific agent or subagent. Additionally, I can open up any of these subagents and we can see their specific configuration as well. Additionally, if I open up our Manage Assistants pane, we'll be able to see every node that each configuration field belongs to. This makes complex multi-agent systems as easy to configure as single agents, and gives us further insights when we go to manage our configuration within Studio. Let's go ahead and give this supervisor agent a test, and we'll see how this configuration is working so far. Great, so you can see our supervisor agent is working as intended. It called our subagents, generated a great response, and responded back to our user. Let's now see how we can take this concept of assistance and configuration and take it to our production deployments on LangGraph Platform. I went ahead and deployed the React agent we were working with earlier onto LangGraph Platform. LangGraph Platform is LangChain's enterprise solution to the development, deployment, and management of your AI agents. For more information about LangGraph Platform, I'll be sure to link to more resources and documentation below. Now that we have our agent deployed, here's where things get really exciting with our assistants. I can jump right into our Assistants tab here, and you'll see I already have a few assistants already created. But let's go ahead and create a new assistant. All I have to do is click that new assistants button here. I can specify which graph I want to use, specify a name, so let's call this our finance writer. We'll give it a description, paste in our system prompt again, select the model we want to use, the different tools we want to give it access to, and we can go ahead and hit Create Assistant. And just like that, we've deployed a production-ready version of our assistant. If I open up our Manage Assistants tab in Studio, you'll see we already have an Assistants ID for this. I can go ahead and specify another assistant right within Studio. And save that down. And if I navigate back to our Assistants tab in our deployment, you'll see both our sports writer and our finance writer are saved and ready for production traffic. We can access these assistants via our production-ready API URL, and we can click into our API docs to see how we can create, manage, and update our assistants programmatically. Jumping into our API spec, you'll see a whole section dedicated to our assistants. We can create an assistant easily. We can search for existing assistants. We can get a specific assistant, and we can also set the latest assistant version. Additionally, when I go to kick off a run with our agent, we can specify the specific assistant ID we'd like to use. Let's jump back in our deployment, and we're going to learn a little bit more about versioning our assistants. Back in LangGraph Platform, as I mentioned earlier, whenever we create or update our assistants, we create new versions of them. This allows for robust version control and rollbacks if we need them. So if I go ahead and modify our assistant here, and save it, go into Studio, you'll see that we have a new version of our finance writer created. I can toggle back to version 1 of this assistant and set it as the active version. We can do this also programmatically via the API, and I'll show you that in a few moments. As we refine our assistants, versioning keeps us safe. Every configuration change creates a new version with a full history. This gives me a complete change history for auditing, instant rollback if versions are underperforming, and the ability to A and B test between different configurations. This allows us to fearlessly experiment with safety nets. Now, let's switch gears and see how we can manage, create, and use these assistants programmatically. We put this notebook together in order to demonstrate how easy it is to create, use, and manage your assistants via our SDK and API. Let's jump right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is import the get client from our LangGraph SDK. We'll then store a few variables in order to get started, including our deployment URL, our API key, and our graph ID. Next, we'll use the getClient function and pass in our URL and API key in order to connect to our LangGraph server. Now that we're connected to our LangGraph server, we can use the create method on our assistants module in order to create a new assistant. All we need to do is pass in our graph ID, our configurable values through the config, and then a name for our assistant. Let's go ahead and give that a shot. As you can see, we're able to successfully create our assistant, and it gave us back an assistant ID. We can now use this assistant ID in order to use this in production. The first thing we have to do to use this in production is create a new thread. So we'll use the create method on the threads module in order to create a new thread. We can then specify some input data. So for this, I'm going to have a human message that says, research the latest news in the art world. Next, in order to invoke our agent, we'll use the client.runs.stream in order to stream back the results to our user. All we need to do here is pass in our thread ID, our assistant ID, the input data, and the stream mode we'd like to use. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. You'll see our assistant took in the request, it then called the advanced research tool, and then respond back to us. This seems like a great response related to the latest news in the art world. Now, let's say I have this assistant deployed and our users can manage it within the front end. Maybe they want to change some configurable fields, such as updating the model or system prompt. What we can do is now use the update method on the assistants module in order to update our configuration. We can pass in the updated configurable fields and then run it from there. As you can see, we've maintained the same assistant ID, but we're now in a new version and our assistant has a new personality where it responds back with puns. So what we can do from here is create a new thread and then invoke our assistant again. This time we'll be asking, if you're an animal, which one would you be and why? As you can see, this time we didn't use any tools, but it responded back that it would be an otter because they're utterly adorable, and on and on and on. That's great, but maybe this new version of the assistant isn't exactly what we're looking for. What we can do is revert back to a previous version of our assistant really easily by using the setLatest method. To do so, all I'll do is pass in our assistant ID and which version we'd like to revert to. And as you can see, we're back to our original research assistant. Our SDK enables us to integrate with existing applications and systems, programmatically create, use, and manage our assistants, and ultimately manage the complete lifecycle of our agents and assistants from code. Additionally, everything we just demonstrated with the SDK is also available through LangGraph Platform's complete REST API specification we showed earlier, so you can integrate with any language or any platform. As we've seen, LangGraph Assistants create a powerful separation between your core agent architecture and its configuration. We can experiment instantly with LangGraph Studio, save and version those assistants, deploy new assistants with LangGraph Platform, and then create, manage, and utilize those assistants programmatically via our SDK or API in production. Try LangGraph Assistants today and transform how you build, iterate, and deploy your agents at scale. Thanks for watching and happy building.